Hi, I'm Dr. Timothy Kelly, a facial plastic surgeon. My independent and clinical research tell me that good-looking people have more fun, make more money, and have more good-looking friends. While people may look at other parts of your body first, ultimately they're going to look at your face to determine if you're ugly. That's where I come in. I specialize in the neck up, in the face. I've developed an innovative technique for injecting botulinum toxin and fillers. With one prick of the needle, I distribute the material as I slowly withdraw, minimizing pain and bruising. I call it the pull-out method.
Dr. Kelly gives me the confidence to live life as a good-looking woman.
It's so great to be good-looking. Thank you, Dr. Kelly.
I wish everyone could feel the way I do about myself.
Since Dr. Kelly worked on me, I've got a new job, a new boyfriend, and I've traveled to Canada. Coincidence? I don't think so.
I can feel men's eyes on me in public, and that makes me feel good. Thanks, Dr. Kelly.
Look at me now.
It's like Dr. Kelly has written a prescription for self-esteem and confidence. I think that's 2 prescriptions.
Thanks to Dr. Kelly's pull-out method, I had a great experience.
Call me for a good-looking face.
Thank you. I don't know how to follow that up. My name is Mark Fratrick. I'm Vice President and Chief Economist at BIA Kelsey. And let me first thank our sponsor for our lunch, Info Group, and with a really nice lunch we had out in the exhibit floor. I'm real excited about this panel. Our keynote speaker is Seth Priebatsch. Those of you who don't know Seth, he's the CEO of LevelUp, and he'll talk about LevelUp and his vision for the mobile payments future. Seth had an interesting history. He had his first startup at age 12, and he told me he wasn't successful. But by 18, he had another one, Postcard Tech, which I guess was a little more successful. And the other big thing about Seth's bio that he proudly says he's a proud Princeton dropout. So I don't know if his parents aren't happy about that. But with no further ado, let me introduce Seth Priebatsch.
Thanks, everyone. Cool. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here. And I'm just going to fire up my slides in a sec. So I'm here to talk to you guys about the idea of Interchange Zero. That when you're all thinking about sort of the small and medium business market, one of the major truths of life for these guys is the existence of payment processing costs, what's often called interchange. And that ends up being a relatively meaningful expense for a lot of these businesses, ranging from sort of 3 to 5%. And the company that I'm working at now, LevelUp, and a lot of major trends are sort of conspiring to drive this cost down to 0. So I'm going to talk a little bit about LevelUp today, but not too much, and a lot more about the idea of Interchange Zero and what it actually means for a small and medium business when the cost of moving money drops to 0, and what you can do then with the data inherent in those payments, inherent in that movement of money, when money starts to suddenly flow a lot more frictionlessly. So before we dive too deep into that, I want to give a quick background on myself. As mentioned today, I'm the Chief Ninja CEO of LevelUp. But I started my very, very long career of I think about 3 years now when I was a freshman at Princeton University. I was there for 2 semesters doing math and computer science. 2 semesters is the legal minimum before they can call you a dropout. If you only stay for 1 semester, then you just attended Princeton. If you make it through 2, you get to drop out. So that was really important. I ended up winning the Princeton Business Plan competition there with a company called Scavenger. And Scavenger, if any of you remember, it was sort of all about the idea of building a game layer on top of the world. Using game mechanics, sort of the things that motivate players to take action in games, to motivate behavior in the real world. And over the course of about a year, Scavenger grew incredibly quickly. Went from being worth nothing to being valued at over $100 million, from being a non-player in the space to being the 2nd largest location-based social network right behind Foursquare. And we were working with major brands, folks like Coca-Cola, folks like Buffalo Wild Wings. And at the end of sort of our first year and a half, we ended up launching the largest location-based campaign, what ended up being the largest location-based campaign of all time, with a group called Buffalo Wild Wings. They're a sort of sports bar and restaurant chain, and they've got about 700 locations all across the country. And this was a really interesting moment in the company's history because over the course of this campaign, they ended up driving 180,000 players to their locations who completed 1.2 million challenges. Challenges are sort of the gamified check-in version that Scavenger kind of built itself around. They unlocked 500,000 rewards, sort of coupons, discounts, created 17 million social impressions, ended up winning the location-based campaign of the year award in 2011. And at the end of this, you know, I was super excited, right? At this point I was like 22 or something, really excited, went into Buffalo Wild Wings office, presented them with all this data, said, look at all these great social impressions we drove. And they said, hey, that's awesome, Seth. Did you know that you also drove several $1 million of marginal revenue for us during that time period? We tracked it through to the point of sale, we can prove it, and you know, between your 17 million social impressions and our couple $1 million of cold hard cash, we don't really care about the tweets. You know, here's your check for 25K, let's do this again next year. And this was both a great moment for the company and also sort of one of the key pivot points for us understanding what was actually going to drive value both for SMBs and for larger businesses as it pertains to the idea of game mechanics and as it pertains to the idea of mobile, because you know, we were able to drive a huge amount of value but prove absolutely none of it. So if any of you have followed our story, this was the moment in time about 2 years ago when we did the conventional startup thing and pivoted like hell. And I ended up locking myself and my executive team in a room for about 2 years. And what we came out with, oh sorry, not 2 years, 2 weeks. That would be much more aggressive. This was 2 years ago, startup world. And what we came out with was LevelUp, which is sort of combining the sort of trend of game mechanics, using games and sort of other structures in the real world to motivate behavior, and mobile payments. And I'll introduce LevelUp very quickly and then dive back into the theory of Interchange Zero and how this is affecting SMB marketing and a lot of other really interesting aspects of the local business world, you know, over the past 2 years and hopefully over the next couple. So as a very quick introduction to LevelUp, in case none of you have used it before, it's a mobile payment application, super simple, free app that you download for iPhone or Android, link your favorite credit or debit card, head to now any of about 5,000 businesses across the country, scan your phone, and a second later your transaction's done, you can leave. There are about 1.5 million users on the platform. Consumers use it because it saves them time, merchants use it because it saves them money on payment processing, and they can run campaigns. They can start taking the game mechanics that Scavenger really spent a lot of time developing, but actually now use them to drive revenue. So 2 more seconds on this. LevelUp has a bunch of different campaigns you can use. Merchants use first visit campaigns to bring new customers in the door, loyalty campaigns to reward them for a certain number of visits, more clever things like time shift campaigns to bring morning customers in to try them out for lunch, and lunch customers to try them out for coffee, even a campaign that fires on when it starts raining, because LevelUp now knows that transactions drop when it starts raining and can sort of bring customers in at that moment in time. Last slide on LevelUp, and then I promise I'll stop talking about that and dive into kind of the more interesting general trends that are pushing this shift forward. LevelUp has a 2-part business model. We move money for 2%. That's cheaper than what most businesses pay for payment processing. It's a cost-neutral thing for us. There's a lot of interesting things happening in mobile payments that are driving costs of moving money down. Our pledge to businesses, sort of along the Interchange Zero theme, is that whatever it costs us to move money is what we charge them. So we don't make any money on that. Where we do make money is off of what I think is the actually interesting shift in mobile payments, being able to use the data to help businesses run campaigns to grow their revenue, and we earn a 25% fee on the credit that businesses give out through campaigns. So with that as a backdrop of sort of my background and why I'm so interested in Interchange Zero, let's jump back to actually what the theory of Interchange Zero is. Again, it's the idea that the cost of moving money is over the next couple of years going to trend to zero. That instead of paying 3 to 5% to Amex, MasterCard, Visa, and Discover to move $1 back and forth from you to whatever business you're visiting, you will pay nothing. Well, the business will pay nothing. Consumers actually do bear a lot of these costs, but it's a little more invisible to us consumers. In reality, while Interchange Zero is a big trend, it's actually a mashup of 2 other smaller trends. The idea of gaming as a trend, and the idea of mobile and mobile payments as a trend. So to introduce these 2, gaming is obviously one that I'm particularly interested in. I am admittedly a pretty hardcore gamer. I've been into games since I can remember, since I had a computer. But a couple fun trends around gaming if you haven't seen these stats yet. Every day, 125 years worth of Angry Birds are played on people's phones. So this is a big trend, not necessarily a good one, but over a century, every day is spent, played, wasted playing Angry Birds. Most interestingly, the average age of a gamer in the United States isn't sort of a teenager eating Cheetos in their parents' basement. It's actually a middle-aged person eating Cheetos in their parents' basement. So this is a trend that's really affecting everyone. Even more interestingly, games are very social. 50% of games are played with a Facebook login. 75% of teens play games, so that's even higher than the national average, so it's not going anywhere. It's strong in the youngest generation. But more interestingly than that is that 34% of heads of households also play games. So the idea that this mega trend of game mechanics is anything but that, a mega trend, is kind of interesting. It's affecting everybody, and it's taking the idea of game mechanics that make us want to play games, and now we're starting to see this sort of leach into the real world in some really fascinating ways. The second mega trend is mobile. This one I'm not going to spend too much time on because I don't think I need to convince anyone here that mobile is a mega trend. The reason I still have this slide here is that this slide is actually not from this presentation. This slide is from the presentation I put together 2 years ago when Scavenger was going through its pivot to become LevelUp, and I wanted to convince a couple of investors that mobile was actually going to be a really big deal and a big enough deal for payments. And what's fun about this slide is 2 years later, these numbers are almost exactly double of what they were in 2011. So in 2011, it was 300 million smartphones were activated annually, and I was like, well, that's a huge trend. Now it's closer to 600 million. In 2011, Starbucks had just launched their mobile payments app, and they were doing about 26 million payments a year. Now it's closer to 50, 60 million payments a year through their mobile phone, and all of these other stats have grown about double. So mobile, pretty mega trend, and starting to make its way into the payments world. So how do these two mega trends combine to the idea of Interchange Zero? And most interestingly, how does it affect local businesses? Well, it affects local businesses in some pretty interesting ways. The first thing to know is that Interchange itself ranges for a local business from anywhere, small, medium business, anywhere from 2 to 20%. And all in all, it adds up to about $50 billion a year that are spent just to move dollars back and forth. In some respects, it's actually the largest invisible tax on the local economy that exists to date. Some examples of this, and you can just sort of look through these as you want, but Interchange, as the price of the item goes down, tends to go up because it's made up of two parts. There's a fixed fee. You pay anywhere from 10 to 30 cents every time someone swipes a card, and then a variable fee that's obviously proportional to the amount of the transaction. But if you look at some of the examples, if you go into a convenience store and you buy a pack of gum, they're paying an effective interchange rate of about 20%. So if you do have a gum habit, pay with cash, they'll definitely appreciate it. More expensive things, it's still big, but lesser as a percentage. The general thesis of Interchange Zero is, wouldn't it be nice if that were 0%? That you could just move a dollar back and forth for free, knock $50 billion of expense out of the economy. And the question is, not wouldn't that be nice? I think everyone agrees that would probably be a good thing. A lot of businesses would be a fan. But how do you actually get there? And as you're probably getting through the presentation, trying to drop hints all over the place, it's a two-step process to get there, and it relies on these two mega trends: the introduction of game mechanics into the world to drive revenue up, we'll talk about that second, and the introduction of mobile into the payments world to drive costs down. So only two steps to knock $50 billion of cost out of the economy, and we've got about 20 minutes left, so we should probably get started on that. They're each doozies, unfortunately. But step one is bringing costs down. And this is basically happening because of mobile. If you follow Interchange, if you follow payment processing, you'll know that over the last 20, 30 years, it's really only gone in one direction, and that direction is up, and it's been going up relatively fast. Credit card companies have pretty much a duopoly over the payments world. MasterCard and Visa control 80, 90% of all payments made through cards in the States. And so the costs tend to trend up, peaking about 2 or 3 years ago at between 3 and 5%. Interestingly, since 2 or 3 years ago, they've actually started to come down. And they're coming down for two reasons. One has to do with a little bit of legislation. A guy called Dick Durbin, who's sort of pushed forward some interesting pro-competitive legislation. But more than that, and the thing that will actually drive it down to zero, is that mobile technology has enabled competition. That while it used to be that there were only really a couple methods of payment, a credit card or cash, now there are a number of them out there that businesses can take advantage of, that they can motivate consumers to use, many of which are far, far cheaper, ranging from Dawala, which is essentially free, to Square, which is 2.75%, no monthly fees, and a lot easier for business to set up. So this competition has been driving costs down, and it essentially means that mobile payments are going to have a massive impact in the SMB world. But the most interesting thing and the trickiest thing about this particular trend is that while they're going to have a massive impact, that impact has almost nothing to do with actually paying with your phone. One of the sort of heretical statements that a mobile payment CEO can say, and I'll say it right now because it's true, is that mobile payments, or rather paying with your phone, not only doesn't matter, but it's not that much better than paying with a credit card. At the end of the day, with a credit card, you're swiping a piece of plastic vertically up and down, and with a mobile phone, maybe you're swiping a piece of plastic vertically or horizontally to the left and right, but it's not really that different. The interesting shift of mobile payments and why SMBs tend to care about it in terms of driving costs down is that instead of just allowing you to pay with your phone, it allows you to have multiple different ways to pay with your phone. To shift from sort of the old world, where you might open your physical leather wallet and have, at maximum 5 different methods of payment, a MasterCard, Visa, Discover, Amex, and cash. Now, in the brave new world, you might open your wallet and have a theoretically infinite number of payment methods. It's not that you're paying with your phone, it's that you're paying through your phone in a number of much cooler ways, much more competitive ways. You might be using any one of the apps in the center to connect to your debit card or to your credit card, or maybe connect directly to PayPal or to your Bank of America account, or maybe even bill directly to Verizon. Heck, if the world really goes strange, maybe you're going to end up paying with Bitcoin. I doubt it, I don't know, but there's a lot of different ways that you could end up paying, and that's why mobile payments are cool, that they're introducing new ways to pay, and what this is doing is essentially making the phone not just a way to pay, but greater than the wallet, actually driving costs down by introducing new methods of payment. Like I mentioned up front, I dropped out of Princeton, so I only made it through Econ 101, but this lesson I was able to pick up, which is that the more methods of doing something you have, the more competition, the lower the costs will end up being. That's my hashtag Econ 101. I'm sure my professor somewhere is really, really proud that I got that one out of there. And this is why mobile payments actually ends up being very, very interesting for the SMB market. The second component of this that I want to talk about is that as complex as legislation and regulation around payments is, this technical innovation to drive costs down is actually being aided in a pretty big way by the government. This is this guy, Dick Durbin. He passed Durbin legislation as part of the Frank-Dodd Act, which essentially broke up the MasterCard Visa duopoly a little bit and shifted the costs of moving money much more into the swipe fees. So you end up paying on a debit card now about 30 cents when a debit card gets swiped, but lowered the percentage fee from about 2% to 0.05%. Lots of numbers, not the most interesting, kind of dry topic to talk about, but one thing that I want to give a real world example of how this can actually impact the SMB market and impact payments is what LevelUp specifically is doing to lower interchange. So if any of you have used LevelUp, or actually forget LevelUp for a moment, how many of you guys have paid with your iTunes account to buy a song, for example? It's probably the better place to start. Cool, almost everyone. This is a much easier one. When you buy a song on iTunes, it's 99 cents to buy a song, and Apple is generally paying about 30 cents in swipe fees to transact across your credit or debit card. So when you buy a song, the absolute last thing they want to do is actually charge your card right then and there, because then they're paying an effective 33% interchange rate. That's really expensive, really painful. So what they do is they wait to see if you'll buy another song, they wait to see if you'll buy another app, they group those transactions together, they bundle them, and only charge your card once for the 2 transactions. This same principle of bundling is available in the world of mobile payments. And as Durbin legislation has gone through and sort of allowed a number of these things, companies like LevelUp, and we're not the only ones doing it, but I have really good data from LevelUp because I can get access to the data, are able to take an average customer's weekly spend, and instead of hitting that card infrastructure every single time, are able to group them all together into one single transaction, lowering interchange pretty dramatically. The quick example here is this is sort of an average user on LevelUp. They use it about 4 times a week. And if we were to charge the customer's card every single time they transacted, as a local business might, what we'd end up paying at the end of the week is about $1.50 in interchange. Instead, by getting a bit smarter about the customer, by knowing their transaction habits, by being able to build up some level of trust, we can group those transactions together, and instead of paying $1.50, we end up paying about 59 cents, a 60-some-odd% reduction in interchange, just by virtue of being a little bit more clever, by virtue of having new methods of payment that can use data in more clever ways to drive down the costs of interchange. So just one interesting example about the first step of Interchange Zero, that basically new technology in the form of mobile payments and new legislation is introducing more competition into the market, and that is driving interchange down bit by bit and sort of granting us the first step in trying to actually remove this $50 billion expense from the SMB market by making payments a lot more efficient. So that's kind of a good first step. But what happens when you pull $50 billion out of an ecosystem is that a lot of people tend to get upset, and there's a lot of infrastructure that is really expensive to run. So you can't just imagine an SMB world or even a full economy where payments are moving for free without some type of monetization model built into it. Where this sort of starts to get solved is via the second mega trend of game mechanics. That while we were able to use data about what a customer is buying and how often they're paying and build up sort of trust to lower interchange, there's also a huge amount of data in payments that isn't being used right now, but that could be used to drive revenue up, to create campaigns, to create smarter loyalty programs, to enable merchants to have the same level of comprehension of their customer that Amazon.com has right now, but actually use that data to drive sales in the real world. So I want to spend the next little bit of the presentation talking about what some of these tools are, some of them from LevelUp, most of them from other companies in the ecosystem that are basically leveraging transactional data to drive revenue up and replace the interchange expense with sort of an advertising-based model. So step 2 on the path to interchange 0 is basically a new monetization model for payments. It's essentially taking this idea of instead of charging 3 to 5% on each dollar that moves through, unlocking the data in that payment, and then applying clever algorithms, clever campaigns, clever game mechanics, clever tools to bring those customers in more often, to bring in new customers, to essentially drive a revenue increase. And like most advertising-fueled businesses, because this essentially is an advertising take on the payments world, monetizing off of the results of that, monetizing off the performance of those campaigns. So because that's a little ethereal, the idea of, okay, there's data in payments and now we're going to apply game mechanics to that data and somehow drive action out of it, somehow drive revenue out of it, I want to bring it to the real world with 3 very specific game mechanics that are some of the most popular for actually being used in the transactional ecosystem. The 3 game mechanics I want to talk about are the sunken reward, the progression dynamic, and the appointment mechanic. So we'll start with the sunken reward, and if any of you happen to be gamers in the audience, and I hope a bunch of you are, you'll recognize some of these examples. But a sunken reward is a reward that isn't earned by a consumer. When you generally think about a reward, you think about something that you do some action and you get a reward. A sunken reward is a different type of reward in that it's just planted at a place. You don't actually have to do anything to win it. You just sort of head to that place and it's automatically granted to you. This is used in a lot of different games that want to promote discovery. That want to promote people actually going out of their way, going to a different part of the world, whether it's a physical world or a virtual world. World of Warcraft is probably the most famous for using this, where they'll plant sunken rewards in different areas of the game to get you out of whatever area you're in and sort of exploring around. So how does World of Warcraft actually translate into using transactional data to drive transactions, to drive revenue in the real world? Well, sunken reward plus transactions is probably best exemplified by a company called ScoutMob, based out of Atlanta. And what ScoutMob did is they sort of looked at the daily deal trend that was, very much in vogue 2 or 3 years ago and said, that's kind of broken because that's a game mechanic that is driving people to make a purchase, driving people to sort of do all sorts of interesting things to get their friends to all buy part of the same deal. But in reality, the problem they're trying to solve is simply discovery. It's simply to get a person from point A to point B, where point A is probably their couch and point B is a restaurant. Let's see if we can do that with a sunken reward. And so they built an app that lets merchants plant rewards at their restaurant. The consumer gets up off their couch, simply heads to the restaurant. Using geofencing, it unlocks the reward on their phone. The reward might be half off, might be 25% off, depends on the business itself. But essentially, it's a sunken reward unlocked by virtue of having made it to that location. We worked with ScoutMob and actually did a lot of simulations on this and tests on this within the LevelUp ecosystem. And the results of using a slightly smarter game mechanic are pretty massive for businesses. We did a lot of research on the data of what a Groupon or a living social daily deal actually drives for a business. And it ends up driving a spend of about 1.25 times the value of the deal. Part of the reason for this is that a Groupon has all sorts of game mechanics in it, but one of the most effective ones, or ineffective ones, is the idea of thresholding. That if you buy a Groupon, spend $10, get a $20 credit, when you head to the business, you're going to do your damnedest to make sure that you spend exactly $20. Because if you spend any deviation from that, as a player, you've lost. Right? Spend $19 and you left $1 behind, you lose. Spend $22 and you spent $2 more than you should have, non-incentivized, and you lose. So it drives the customer to spend what is actually the least profitable amount of money for the merchant. What's nice about the ScoutMob approach and sort of the sunken reward approach, and here we saw a 4.7 times increase over the spend, over the value of the deal, is that all that game mechanic is solving is bringing the person to the location. It's generally a much smaller incentive, but one that the consumer doesn't have to buy ahead of time, and it removes all of these thresholding criteria, and it just ends up driving a much more profitable interaction. The core takeaway from this section is basically that with data and a little bit of clever application of game mechanics, you can increase profitability for businesses and take tools that they might be using and improve them in some pretty interesting ways, all by just switching the underlying game mechanic of what that campaign happens to be. The second one I want to talk about is going to be much, much more familiar to everyone. It's the progression dynamic. You must have seen this and probably have seen this all over the place. This is the world's most popular game mechanic, and it's one in which to succeed, the player is basically asked to do a set of iterative actions over and over again until they've completed some task. You see this in again, World of Warcraft, in sort of paladins leveling up from level 1 to 85. You also see this when you log into LinkedIn every day. That in the upper right corner, there's a little progress bar that shows you exactly how complete your profile is. I've been stuck at 85% for the last 2 years, so if anyone likes this talk and wants to recommend me on something, maybe I'll get to 100% and complete that game mechanic and finally make the bar go away. But this mechanic is used all over the place because it's very, very effective. In the real world, you've seen this all the time in the humble punch card. There's a million different companies out there using the trends of mobile to sort of improve the game mechanic of the loyalty program, of the progression mechanic. There's a company called Perk Street, there's Perkville, there's Perkaroo, I think there's even one called Percocet. For whatever reason, they've all got Perk in their name, and they enable customers to basically check in or transact and unlock rewards as they go. Again, here we wanted to use some real data from the LevelUp ecosystem, so we worked with merchants that accept LevelUp and are also running a loyalty program, some of them within LevelUp, some of them using a different program, and we basically asked them to give us access to their data of new customers every given day, that's sort of the orange section at the top, and repeat customers every given day, that's sort of the darker blue section at the bottom. And we tracked them from the moment when they turned on whatever loyalty mechanic they wanted to turn on. And different loyalty mechanics are more effective. They vary by business type, but the net result across this data is from about 300 or 400 different businesses is pretty unambiguous, that the moment a loyalty campaign is turned on, the amount of transactions you drive from repeat visitors goes through the roof. It consistently grows. Interestingly, the amount of transactions you drive from new customers isn't affected at all. So if any business thought, hey, I'm going to turn on a loyalty program, that's going to win new customers and then make them more loyal, it doesn't do that. It's a mechanic built to reinforce existing behaviors, but it does drive existing customers to come back a lot more often, spend a lot more money. Just sort of interesting, unsurprising data, but the real nuance of this comes from then reading that merchant's data and helping them optimize their given loyalty mechanic in a lot of cool, a lot of interesting ways. And there may be, 100 companies in the States doing this at this moment in time, but it's a really profitable exercise. The last game mechanic I want to talk about is one of my personal favorites. This is the appointment dynamic. And the appointment dynamic is built to solve another problem, which is sometimes you don't just want players to do something, and you don't just want them to do it again and again and again, but you want them to do it at a very specific time. The best example of this in the modern world is Farmville. How many of you guys have played Farmville? This is probably an interesting one. All right, good answer. There are only like 3 or 4. So I got sucked into Farmville, and it was really fun. But I later learned that Farmville really used the appointment dynamic very aggressively. And what they wanted to do was basically say, hey, every 24 hours you have to return to the game and harvest your crops and water your crops, otherwise your digital goods will wilt, your digital crops will die, and this would be really, really traumatizing for a lot of people. So every 24 hours, make sure to log back in. About 2 or 3 years ago, as Zynga was preparing to IPO, Mark Pincus realized, hey, we need to drive more usage, we need to drive more active daily players, we need to drive more revenue, so we need people coming back to the site not every 24 hours, but every 12 hours. So all they did was they shrunk their appointment dynamic. And instead of the crops wilting if you didn't water them every 24 hours, they would wilt if you didn't water them every 12 hours. And lo and behold, people started logging in every 12 hours. And then they said, you know what, if we can do it for 12 hours, maybe we can do it for 6. And so they cut it down to 6 hours. And lo and behold, people would log in every 6 hours. And then they dropped it to 3 hours, and then they dropped it to 90 minutes. And coincidentally or not, this was actually right around the time the recession really took hold. I think it's connected. I'm not sure that they do. But they eventually got people logging in every 90 minutes to Farmville to water their virtual crops, basically just using and to some degree abusing the appointment mechanic to get people to take action at a very specific time. Super interesting. Lest we blame Farmville too much, they weren't actually the first people to do this. If any of you remember the Tamagotchi, this is really the world's most famous appointment mechanic. I had a Tamagotchi, and great, great fun. But games aside, how does this actually apply to the real world? Well, sometimes as a business, you have data that suggests that you want to bring people in at a specific time, either to drive a lot of traffic then, or to counteract a time when you might otherwise be totally empty. There's a company that specializes in doing this called ThinkNear. They just recently got acquired, or maybe a year ago, got acquired by a company called Telenav. And what they do is they basically read a merchant's credit card processing data and identify dips, identify peaks, identify all sorts of other trends within the merchant, and then come up with campaigns based around the appointment mechanic to drive traffic at that moment in time. Big game night, turn off any social media marketing, any promotions, because you're already going to be packed. It starts raining, fire up promotions to bring people in. There's a lot of traffic on the freeway. Things are going to be backed up, maybe target customers then to bring them in for a detour from their normal coffee place and wait out the traffic. All sorts of really interesting things you can do around this. Again, going back to the data we have in the LevelUp ecosystem, we want to just take the impact of a very specific event that merchants have absolutely no control over, which is the rain. And so we worked with all of our restaurants in Philly, again about 300 or 400 of them, asked them if they would be willing to share their data. Most of them said yes. And we created this graph, which is basically green line is sort of normalized transaction data, how many transactions any given business saw on any given day, and the orange line is inches of precipitation. And unsurprisingly, restaurateurs in Philadelphia hate the rain because as rain goes up, transaction volume goes down. What's not shown here, because I couldn't figure out a good way to represent a third axis in KEYNOTE, but what's not shown here is that the average ticket price of the transaction actually grows by about 20% when it rains. So you get fewer customers in the door, but they spend more. This might be because they're staying for longer, they're bringing something back for their coworkers, they've braved the elements, so they're rewarding themselves with an extra cookie or whatever it happens to be. But it becomes very profitable for merchants to be able to take action on this data, leverage the appointment mechanic, and drive people in at the moment in time when it's raining, because they know that they're going to be empty and they know that those transactions end up being more profitable. Very simple use of game mechanics, but something that really hasn't been done, that transactional data hasn't been mined in this real-time way really ever before. So looping back to the second step of Interchange Zero, this new monetization model for payments, which you're starting to see a lot of companies kind of circle around the edges of, is rather than charging a merchant and making your profit off of charging them 3 to 5% in interchange and payment processing fees to move a dollar back and forth, there are a lot of companies out there saying, you know what, we'll either move payments at our cost and work to lower it, or we'll move payments for free, or we'll give you a discount on payments, and what we want in exchange is access to your data, and then we're going to provide you with the tools to help you use that data and grow your business. And then when you do grow your business, suddenly we're aligned with your incentives and we'll monetize off of that as well. And this new monetization model for payments is critical to Interchange Zero because not only are costs going to go down, but revenue has to come from somewhere else. And this is actually how I think payments will play out over the next couple of years, that the commodity service of payment processing begins to fade away, and payment processors have to sort of fight for the SMB market share over who can provide the most value, who can be the smartest about merchant data. So to summarize, Interchange Zero is the idea that the cost of moving money is eventually going to go to zero. This has two parts. Step one is cost going down, maybe mainly mobile technology and a little bit of legislation, driving the cost down through increased competition. Step two is revenue going up, based entirely off of using the data inherent in payments to make really smart decisions, to provide really clever campaigns and game mechanics for businesses to actually drive revenue. And the combination of these two is, I think, going to be one of the most interesting transformational shifts in payments for the SMB market, because it removes a $50 billion cost and provides the level of smarts of marketing and sophisticated campaigns that has previously been withheld for only e-commerce companies, but now for companies in the real world, all based off of this sort of transactional data flow and the access to that information. So that's all I've got to say on that. I think we've got a little bit of time left, and yeah, thanks for listening, and I guess we'll answer any quick questions.
Come sit down.
Cool.
Thank you, Seth. It was real interesting about what you talked about in Interchange Zero. Given that you are lowering the cost for merchants, and a lot of the people in the audience are in the business of selling services to merchants, what's your biggest challenge when you're dealing with merchants to convince them of this? How do you convince them to buy into this model?
Sure. So probably the biggest challenge that we face with merchants is really education, right? It's taken me maybe 30 minutes to explain just the general concept of Interchange Zero. You generally don't get 30 minutes of time from a merchant in your first call. So where we actually start is we'll often ring up merchants and say, what do you pay in payment processing? And they'll say all in, 2.8, 3.2. If it's a coffee shop, 5 or 6%. So you know what? We're a payment processing company. It's 2%. Just use it for payments. It's cheaper. And then 30 days in, 60 days in, we start sending them these automated heuristics, which say, hey, did you know that your customers behave like this? Can we help you grow? Can we help you grow your revenues? And that's kind of the conversation we tend to have. It's over 6-7 weeks.
A recent presentation you made, you suggested that you expect Facebook and Amazon to enter into this space, and this frightens you. Elaborate on that prediction, and what frightens you about their potential entry?
Sure. So when you look at the payments world, the natural competitors are people like Amex, MasterCard, Visa, Discover, First Data, anyone who's already processing payments. If payments play out in an interchange zero way, where you're not making money off of existing interchange and that margin, Amex and MasterCard become a lot less scary because it's hard for them to pivot their entire business. They're too big. But if you look at Facebook or Amazon, they already make money around the payment by being smarter, by adding value in different ways. So if Facebook were to enter the payment space, they could give away payment processing for free and actually just start by subsidizing all of it, monetize off the additional data, and help businesses grow with both the audience and the campaigns. And so if I were to think there was a real competitor who could absolutely wreck house in payments, it wouldn't be MasterCard or Visa, it would be an Amazon or a Facebook.
We've really run out of time, so I have one last question. As you introduce yourself, and then you introduce in many areas, sometimes you're referred to as the CEO of LevelUp, and sometimes as the Chief Ninja. What's the difference in those roles at your company?
So it's a very subtle distinction, but when we were first raising money, we've now raised about $50 million from Google Ventures, Deutsche Telekom, Highland Capital, good investors. But when we were first raising money, I was a 19-year-old dropout, and I had no idea how to raise money. And I did a bunch of research, and there were all these articles about venture capitalists negotiating against CEOs. I said, well, that seems like something they're probably very practiced at. I'm willing to bet they've never negotiated against a ninja. So I will be chief ninja. I will go in and I will maybe sneak up behind them and pull some crazy karate negotiation move and maybe have an upper hand. And I'm not sure if that helped at all, but that is the honest answer as to where it came from. And then it just stuck.
Thank you, Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Seth.
Thank you.